Today, I'm playing an anime-esque open-world RPG with a gacha system attached to it, Tower of Fantasy. Tower of Fantasy is a super fun open-world game with hints of an MMORPG twist, and today I'd like to spend some time giving you 12 tips and bits of information about the game. This is not the usual game I cover on this channel, but it officially releases on August 10th here in the States, and I was fortunate enough to experience the game through both their public beta test in April and a closed test client right before the game's official release. Tower of Fantasy has so many bits of information that you need to take in when you start, so if you feel like you're going to be overwhelmed, hopefully I can ease that worry. Starting off, at the moment that you gain control of your character, you're going to want to understand a few things. One of the most basic mechanics in Tower of Fantasy is the weapon system, where your character can wield 3 different weapons and switch freely between each one during combat. Each weapon has its unique attacks, abilities, and element, giving a lot of variety for combat setups. There is no elemental reaction system, but each element has its own effects, like ice weapons being able to freeze enemies. Larger enemies also have a shield mechanic where you can use heavy weapons like hammers and claymores to break them faster. Doing so will stun the enemy and stop them from unleashing their powerful attacks, so there's a lot to consider when choosing your weapon lineup. Second, as you land attacks and abilities, your 2 weapons that aren't being used will build up charge, which is represented by the white bar that wraps around your weapon's icon. Once you accumulate full charge, the next weapon you switch to will unleash a Discharge Attack. One thing to note is that once you've accumulated full charge, the next weapon you switch to will always use a Discharge Attack. You cannot switch to a weapon and hold onto your accumulated charge if your Discharge Attack is ready, so be sure to manage and plan ahead if you want to use a specific Discharge Attack. Dashing gives you invincibility frames, but Discharge Attacks don't. Dashing at the precise moment to dodge and avoid damage is nothing new to games. In Tower of Fantasy, it's no surprise that dashing is the main way to avoid taking damage. Not having iframes on Discharge Attacks is not that big of a deal for most enemies, but against some of the most hardest bosses and other multi-man content, you might want to make sure that you won't get hit by a boss's heavy attack right as you use your Discharge Attack. For most characters, double jumping in the air then using your Discharge Attack will grant you at least some level of safety. It's also cool to note that in Tower of Fantasy, dashing doesn't consume stamina like climbing or swimming does, and has a separate bar that shows how many times that you can dash. This will be super important for some of my later advanced tips. Aerial attacks are one of the coolest things Tower of Fantasy has to offer in its combat system. Attacking in the air consumes stamina, and the longer you stay in air, the more stamina is used up, so watch out for that. Aerial attacks provide some of the highest DPS for a lot of characters, so oftentimes during bosses, you'll see a lot of people use their aerial attacks and then try to avoid as many attacks as possible with their dashes during their time on the floor. Also, there is no universal plunge attack mechanic in the game, and only some weapons have plunge attacks that are built into their moveset, so doing an aerial attack right before you hit the ground is one way to stop fall damage. For the final combat tip, we have the mechanic called Fantasia. I'm not sure if the English translation has changed from beta, but essentially when you perfectly time a dodge, it will put you into a state where time freezes and you're free to DPS the enemy down. Upon triggering this time freeze, you'll also get full charge on your standby weapons to unleash a Discharge Attack. This is some super useful stuff that you'll be using a lot in combat to rotate between your weapons. So now that you understand how combat works, you're probably wondering, how the heck do I get my hands on some cool weapons? Well, of course, it leads us to the gacha. Some people hate it, and some people love it. But regardless, if you want a sick scythe to swing around, or maybe a powerful staff to heal your teammates, you're gonna have to throw yourself into the gacha system. Fear not if that word triggers you, Tower of Fantasy actually has a fairly generous gacha system compared to any other game that I've played. Tower of Fantasy has 5 different currencies you can summon with, all of which have their own separate banners. These currencies are Black Nucleus, Gold Nucleus, Proof of Purchase, Red Nucleus, and Special Vouchers. Of the 5 total banners that I saw in beta, 3 of them were standard/permanent banners, while the other 2 were rate-up/limited banners. 2 of the standard banners use Black Nuclei and Gold Nuclei respectively as currencies to pull new weapons, while the 3rd standard banner was for matrices, which are essentially the artifacts for your weapons that provide bonus stats and even extra effects with a 2-set, 3-set, or 4-set combination. The currency to pull for these matrices on the standard banner is the proof of purchase. Rated banners featured a banner for the promoted weapon and a banner for the special matrices that go with the promoted weapon. To pull the limited weapon, you're going to need the red nuclei, whereas special vouchers will be used to pull on the Rate Up Matrices banner. Rate Up currency is a lot harder to get, but don't worry, if you don't want to summon for a limited weapon or its matrices, it seems like in the Chinese version it takes anywhere from 6 months to 12 months for a limited weapon to go into the standard pool. With up to 5 banners to pull on, there's a lot of differing rules between each banner that you'd want to understand. Luckily for you, I've neatly compiled all the necessary information into a table that is hopefully easy for everyone to understand. This information is also readily available on any Tower of Fantasy index or wiki. Refer to the table if you need any specific information, but just some general talk about summoning. All summoning items aside from Black Nucleus can be purchased using 150 Dark Crystals, which serves as the premium currency in Tower of Fantasy. Other ways to get these 5 summoning currencies without spending Dark Crystals are dailies, achievements, exploration, events, battle passes, and more. By doing these things, you can easily get your hands on your first SSR weapon on the first day with the pre-registration rewards, since your first SSR on the standard banner shows up around 30 pity. Afterwards, with event rewards and progression, you'll have a couple more SSR weapons by just diligently playing the game upon its first week or 2 of release without spending a dime. So I've talked about 2 of the main features of Tower of Fantasy, which are the combat and gacha. For these final few points, let's touch upon exploration, which is the last beginner piece of content to cover. Tower of Fantasy marks out all the supply pods and nuclei that you can collect for summons and resources, so getting max exploration in a region is really easy. The main POI, or point of interest, that I want to draw your attention to is the world bosses. Doing weekly activity will give you these password chips to claim rewards from a pool that even includes a random SSR character or SSR matrices. Although these drop rates are quite low, you can still get a ton of 4-star matrices from these bosses that will hold out for a large portion of the early and mid game, so do your best to unlock the weekly activity feature as fast as possible. The last thing to note is that these world bosses are one of the main cornerstones of MMO content in Tower of Fantasy. These bosses are pretty much impossible to kill solo, and you're going to need a large party of players in the same channel/world to kill these bosses. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people in world chat on release, but you can also join a crew to organize world boss raids if you really like the guild aspect of MMO games. Here are 2 tips to help you get around the map faster. Remember how I said that dashing, not consuming stamina, was an important mechanic in Tower of Fantasy? Well, here's where that comes into play. Tower of Fantasy's official social media accounts have already revealed the Jetpack gadget, but without upgrading the gadget, it starts out pretty inefficient on your stamina bar. To cover more aerial distance, we can deploy the Jetpack, then dash and immediately redeploy the Jetpack. Doing so will not only save us some stamina, but also cover more distance. The other advanced tip about exploring faster that I want to share is about climbing. Climbing is slow and expensive on your stamina bar like the Jetpack, but there's actually a way to climb the highest mountains without consuming any stamina thanks to Tower of Fantasy having double jumps. If you find any wall or mountain that isn't a slant, then all you have to do is start in the climbing position, let go, double jump, and attach back onto the wall by pressing the forward key. On PC, the default inputs are Control, Space, Space, and W in quick succession. It takes a while to get used to, but once you have the keybinds down, it will save you so much time and so much stamina. This right here is genuinely one of my favorite tips to give to new Tower of Fantasy players, which is why I saved it for last. But other than that, that's all I have time for. Hopefully I've gotten some of you guys excited for Tower of Fantasy because this is my first time branching out for this channel's content. I don't know how much of the game I'm going to cover, and if I do, whether or not I'm going to make a separate channel or keep everything on one channel. If you guys have any preferences or questions, then definitely let me know down in the comment section below. Otherwise, I hope to see some of you in Ida, and just like always, I'll see y'all in the next one. Peace.